Okay, great. Let's get going. So I apologize for it taking a little longer to get started today. We had to switch hosts right at the last moment, and someone changed the password for hosting and live streaming. So hopefully we're up and live streaming. If you're on the call today and you haven't been here before, then this is the Meshery development call. We meet once a week. It's the 20th of April. The Meshery is a CNCF project. All are welcome to come and participate and highly encouraged to do so. Many of you who are on the call are familiar faces. If there's anyone that's on the call that hasn't been here before, now's your chance to say hi. It looks like everybody has been here more than once. Which means that if any of you have a topic, please call it out and let's go over it. Otherwise, drop your name in the minutes and we'll get rolling. So Uzair has the first topic. Uzair isn't on. He is offline this week. So let's move this down to next week. I have talked, you know what, let's actually talk about this for just a moment. It's worthwhile and kind of probably of interest to everyone. So I have talked to Uzair about this a couple of times, and once this week, just catching him off hours. So there's a design spec out there for Meshery. It's I guess the spec is called the Troubleshooting Toolkit, I suppose. It's something of an acknowledgement that getting Kubernetes up, getting service meshes up, getting all of the Meshery components up, sometimes that can be a challenge. In the past, we've had a connectivity wizard. So as many of you were here as that was being worked on, this connection wizard, which was when you first pull up Meshery, it would have just this a stepper that you would go through to make sure that Meshery is connected to Kubernetes, that if Prometheus and Grafana were in the environment, it was connected there. And so it was just a simple wizard that would step users through, making sure, helping them guarantee that they had a functional environment. That wizard had some challenges. It's been, the code is still in Meshery UI. It's just not visible. You can't navigate to it easily. That's probably something that should come back at some point, is just a simple setup wizard. Who remembers that connectivity wizard?
I do.
Yeah. It was right up here, and it would basically walk people through each of these steps, but in a simpler way, in a guided way. And so it was kind of a first time use thing. So that's a related concept to this troubleshooting toolkit. It's just helping people get up and going. The troubleshooting toolkit, or at least as this is described, is intended to acknowledge that while all of the contributors and those that use and work on Meshery do their best to make sure that it is of the highest quality, that there's the inevitable bug that comes in. I'm going to share my whole screen here to say that, even software like Docker Desktop that is used by, has 15 million installs, 15 million users. This is the Docker Desktop UI. And, there's a couple of prominent buttons at the top. One of them is this debug area. This is the Docker Desktop troubleshooting toolkit, if you will, or it's the place where you go to squash bugs or reset to factory defaults, purge the database, reset your Kubernetes cluster. Like, it's pretty prominent. And this is a pretty great piece of software. Even to that extent, it's got its toolkit pretty much right in your face. And so There's a similar need for Meshery as a piece of software to be able to let people either troubleshoot or reset aspects of Meshery. So maybe if the operator didn't get installed on a cluster, or maybe they don't want the operator installed on a cluster, that they could turn it on or off or re-provision it. Occasionally people they'll deploy the operator, which will in turn deploy MeshSync and Meshery broker. And it's not always the case that MeshSync or the broker is necessarily available over the network between where Meshery server is deployed and how MeshSync and NATs are exposed from the Kubernetes cluster. Those don't always get exposed. It depends upon the type of cluster that you're running and the type of networking that's going on. And so some amount of tools to help troubleshoot that setup can be helpful. And that's what this spec is kind of going over, is different scenarios where people may have challenges. Particularly in this case, it's around probably 3 components that this spec talks about. So it's the operator, MeshSync, the broker. It also talks about Meshery server's database, and that on occasion might get corrupt or might have a bunch of stale data that people want to dump. And so what tools do people have to do that? That's what this spec talks about. It's not a very in-depth spec necessarily. The crux of what Uzair is working on is more or less right here, is making sure that there are switches to either deploy or undeploy the operator, the MeshSync, and the broker, maybe independently. The ability to reset Meshery server's database from the UI, so a button to do that. And then to update what the behavior behind these 2 chips in particular, the one for Meshery broker, the one for MeshSync. Today, if you hover, it says that you'll redeploy MeshSync. If you hover, it says you'll reconnect NATs. And it's like, well, those are great utilities to have. But what users have been taught over time is that if you have a connection, a connection is represented as a chip, as this component. And when you click on it, the behavior would be that you'd get a quick connectivity test just to make sure that Meshery server can talk to this component. And so that's the same behavior for other chips, that other connections that might be around, is just a ping test, a connectivity test. And so if there's a different behavior of like redeploying something or reconnecting something, that's probably unexpected by the user, and that we probably need to have a different user experience, different interface for them to do that. And so that's what the spec is kind of going over, is augmenting a little bit, like, because there's no response really here. It's not saying, oh, you're connected. Rather, it's performing a procedure, and it's not quite clear to the user what that is. So I'll stop there and say, does anyone have comments or questions, or does anyone think that just a myopic focus on these 3 components and the database, maybe that's too small of a focus? Maybe there's other components that need, different tests. Something that would be nice in time is when users are on the dashboard, if they've got an adapter connected, they'll get some amount of information here about what the adapter is, what port it's running on, and normally like what version it's running. So in the parentheses that are blank right now, usually that it would be reporting the version. I think I built and I'm running that adapter locally, so it may not be reporting it. But it's that type of tooling that can be very helpful for people being comfortable with how their environment is running.
Okay, that sounds great. By the way, it will also be able to start and initialize Docker containers, right? So sending it to server. Is it possible? Because when adapter is not loaded, so in order to load it, so we have to run a container by itself.
Yeah, for my part, I think that that's a great thing for Meshery to be able to do. And it's already doing that for any number of other, types of systems. Why wouldn't it be capable of allowing users to, from the UI, switch on or off, deploy or undeploy an adapter, as opposed to just connecting to the adapter? Because if you're using the CTL client, the CLI client, users can do that, but for whatever reason, we're not exposing that ability in the UI client, and yep, the functionality is already there.
By the way, these 4 adapters were there. It was not shown previously, right? These 5, 6 were deployed, and we just connected it.
Yeah, I don't. To be fair to whatever is going on with this particular deployment, like I just refreshed my screen and then it connected to all of the available ones. I don't know. I'm running this inside.
So yeah, probably the time you had loaded the screen 9081, there were only Istio component open. Maybe, yeah, fine now. Everything is connected.
There is a little bit of an issue going on though. You can see that one, there's an underscore in the app mesh, in the name for app mesh. It is reporting its version number, which is good. And so too is Cilium. The underscore, I think, probably comes from the SMP spec. Not a big deal, but a couple of the adapters are missing their version numbers. So this is a good note for anyone maintaining or working on adapters. There should be uniformity across all of them for how it is that, well, they're reporting their version, and how it is that at build time, that version number gets baked in. Would anyone mind opening up an issue? If not, I will. The issue is just calling out that there's a few adapters that don't report their version number.
I'll wait. I'll
Thank you. Perfect. Was that Abhi or who
yeah,
was that?
just me.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Next topic is, well, has Piyush's name against it. I'm not sure if Piyush is on the call. No, not today. So Abhi, this is one of those things that I've been kind of requesting of Ashish to spend time on and to try to help us get to just uniformity across all the adapters. And he needs help. He has been looking at this tracking spreadsheet, which is in the community drive. It's just been using it as a temporary place to identify what adapters are supporting what versions of the mesh, and just kind of where they're at with respect to what version of MeshKit are they on, and these kinds of things. And ultimately, this spreadsheet needs to go away, as this should all be self-documenting things. But there's a lack of uniformity here. Like, we're seeing the missing build numbers. So I'll bring this up because there's a lot of help needed. Some of what's been discussed recently has been about automated, end-to-end tests. But I'll put the link because I'm hoping people will jump in.
This might be a bit out of turn, but you were just talking about the uniformity of the adapters and everything. And I realized this is probably not going to happen because it's a bit late in the game to be doing significant changes like this. But I think that it would be much easier to manage the adapters in a mono repo rather than individual repositories for each and every one. For instance, with MeshKit version, if they're all in the same repository and referencing the same Go mod, right? You only have to update it in one place instead of having to go into a dozen different adapter repos and make sure those are all updated.
Yeah.
It would also perhaps allow a bit more reuse, since common functionality could be leveraged by all the adapters in one place. MeshKit and Meshery Adapter Library do a good job of providing common code that can be reused between the adapters, but since each of them are separate, I think there's still a bit of duplication that happens just in the process of working on them. However, I know that, like I said, it is late in the game, and so making such a massive change might not be feasible.
Just overhead of releases, kind of not just releases, but sort of process and tracking and just more things to, yeah. If anyone else has comment here, speak up.
And not just MeshKit Meshery Adapter, but actually all the adapters themselves. You know, something that probably noticed I've struggled with is a bit of the dependency hell, and you know, recently been trying to work on getting the Nginx adapter up and running, and I think I mentioned in Slack yesterday, but all the adapters import MeshKit and Meshery or the adapter library. But the adapter library also imports MeshKit. And so if you ever have to make an update, there's like this almost circular dependency between them. And so you have to be mindful of the order in which your changes are merged to those repositories.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not, yeah, that's, I haven't contemplated, I haven't contemplated the, how some of those circular dependencies. I'm not sure if those that are working on, yeah, actually, Avi, I'm about to go over a bunch of negatives, which I don't have I am going to speak to it from an unopinionated perspective, hopefully. But the circular dependencies are something to be avoided, and they might, I suspect, part of how those come about might be a lack of crisp delineation between what is appropriate to go into the adapter library versus what is appropriate to go into MeshKit, and how some of their reuse and some of their interchange ends up overlapping. Like, yeah, if we literally get like deadlocked, that would be not good. There's a number of Golang dependencies, I think, that do get worse based on like not just having a single mono repo, like which I guess is sort of obvious from the extent that like, that's what a dependency is, hey, if you're reducing the number of repos, then you're reducing the number of dependencies and some of the complications that come with them. So here's the, yeah, I guess like, here's a big challenge, a couple of challenges around, but there's some great stuff about monorepos and also not. So, I don't know. One thing could be that in terms of Meshery's distribution is like, that's another thing to consider is, hey, as a distribution, what if there's an all-in-one build that has just
changes in all the adapters, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Just kind of put it into one, and assuming that like the image size isn't overly large, maybe that's probably just less psychological overhead on users, less things to connect to and track and take care of. And it's just, you know, one item. Well, much like any architectural conversation, it's just riddled with trade-offs or compromises, or I could see a strong argument being made for a distribution of one binary to ease the burden of users who either don't need scale out or don't have security or other requirements to like keep components separate.
About the producible artifacts, sorry to interrupt. We could have the workflows like independent, like it's a monorepo, but it doesn't have to be one single distributable. But then the workflows that are like how they look today, it will need to be refactored so that they could produce a separate artifact. But I'm not familiar with the GitHub releases, so that probably might, yeah, I'm not sure if there's a constraint that a single repo cannot produce like separate artifacts or releasable items. Like maybe that someone else have more context.
It should be able to, because in Meshery, the Meshery server and Meshery CTL are both in the same repository. And so that's what I was thinking, a similar structure for the adapters and adapter libraries in MeshKit. And I wasn't thinking about changing the way the builds are created. As far as you would still have the same individual binaries for each of the adapters, it would just be all in one place. But to your point, I'm not sure how releases go as far as like versioning. If you would have if all of the adapters would have the exact same version, or how that part would work.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. That wasn't my response. Wasn't exactly what what you were probably thinking, which was, I didn't speak directly to what you'd said, but like jumped to, oh, actually, if we had a mono distribution, that might be. It's like, okay, well, that's worth discussing onto its own merit and is certainly related, but is almost is a highly related discussion, but almost a separate topic as well. So back on, like Jared, much of the topics that you bring up are really good topics. Like this is a really good topic, and it's difficult. There, I don't know that there is a singularly correct answer. Rather, what you end up leaning back on are like, what are we trying to optimize for, and what are the design principles of the project, or the design principles of these components or this functional area, and then trying to formulate the best path forward from there. Because you can't arrive at a singularly correct one in many of these discussions because it's actually depending upon what you're trying to optimize for. One or the other one is much better than the other. So some of the trade-offs that go around are on the first topic about MeshKit and Meshery Adapter Library. It's like, yeah, that's like at first blush, it's quite tempting. It's like, is there really a separation between these two? What's the like judicial ruling when some reusable function is identified as being like, oh, hey, that's reusable. It should probably either go into the adapter library or into MeshKit. Like, what's the decision-making process there for which one goes where? That's not necessarily always clear. To the extent that it isn't really clear, that kind of lends credence to an argument that says putting them to, but then just like, if you can't tell the difference, like, why aren't they just one in the first place? Or like, if, and here's part of the thing is, so there's the of Meshery's components, the adapters are, I think, the most prominent individual components. So there's like Meshery server, which most of the time, a lot of us just say Meshery, and we generally mean like the server component. There's, when you break out all the components, there's a UI, which doesn't really, which at the moment, given that it's non-Golang, it's less of a consideration in this particular discussion, but it relates to like, why don't we just have them all in one repo anyway? So there's the UI, there's the CTL, there's MesheryPerf that's coming forth as an individual component to help do different types of performance, advanced performance characterizing. Meshery server, Meshery CLI, MesheryPerf, the adapters, there's the docs, there's the provider UI, the Meshery UI, there are extensions. Fine. There was something else. I forget. Oh, there's the operator, mesh sync, and Meshery broker as other components. So it's like, therein lie probably part of the first crux of the question about what functions benefit adapters and what functions, like what the concept is that at the highest level, if you can call yourself a Meshery component, you'd have some similar characteristics between all of them, and that you would derive those, in this case, the way that we're structured today, like from MeshKit, where you'd be able to register your capabilities, you'd be able to report on your version, report on your operations that you support, like do a certain number of base level things that make you look like and make you become a Meshery component. If you're one of the 10 adapters, then you may have some additional common functionalities that you're looking to do for interacting with Git or downloading that or doing a Helm thing or something. And to Jared's point, like, it's not like it's not like these other components, Meshery operator, Meshery mesh sync, Meshery broker, Meshery CTL, and Meshery server, these other 5 or so, 6 or whatever I said. It's not like they don't sometimes have some of the same GitHub or Helm chart or whatever. It's not like they don't have some of the same needs that the adapters do, but they're not entirely the same. And so historically, like in part of the decision-making process for how these came about, that was sort of the concept was that, hey, that we're writing distributed systems software that's following in the footsteps of kind of the microservices movement, in which these different adapters can move at their own pace because they're supposed to interface with these different service meshes that they themselves move at their own pace. And so let's free them of it all being tightly interlocked and tightly coupled such that they can do whatever they need to do. Like while they're ideally all very similar, and we're trying to drive as much uniformity as possible to help sustain all of them and help have high quality for each of them, that if Cilium as a service mesh doesn't have the concept of sidecars, it has daemon sets like traffic mesh that doesn't do, like if some of these are significantly different from the next, then it's good that they're able to move independently and be versioned independently. But so long as they're speaking that common kind of MeshKit, or they're speaking the common Meshery component language, if you will. Today that's been, or historically that's been gRPC. That's part of the backdrop as to, and then there's these other components, Meshery server, CTL, and so on, that aren't adapters. And so the concept was that they would have a separate library. One would be the parent of the next.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail the meeting with architecture thing. I'm
But
easily sidetracked, so sorry.
no, but it's a good.
Yeah.
Even of what I just said, it's not like that was more of an explanation, and it draws out some logic as to some logical reasoning. It wasn't necessary, in my mind, wasn't necessarily like a strong argument that like it would need to be quantified. How much difference is, okay, we've been doing this for a while, like how much difference really is there between the library and MeshKit? Like, and what's the overhead involved in that? Like maybe bringing those, like your initial suggestion of maybe bringing those together is, there's merit to like flushing out that discussion. Like there's merit to, if you take it one step, that's actually what I was going to do is like take it one step forward and say, well, hey, why do we have any adapters at all? Why don't those just come together? And like, yeah, it does come down to some fundamental, like, I don't know. It's been tempting because it's a pain in the rump to go around, especially with GitHub has improved and improved and improved, but still managing this many repos and all of the process and things that goes behind them is still, there's a reason, that's why they have the enterprise edition. Yeah, it's, if the project was moving slowly, then having things congeal and be a little more tightly coupled in a mono repo is maybe nicer and better. It's less complication, there's been a ton of effort to make sure that, yeah, I don't know, that things are coordinated and can be. Anyway, it's a good discussion point to, I think, continue to have about Meshery Adapter Library and MeshKit, because it may not be that we're really benefiting from those being separate. The rest of the components, like Meshery CTL, do you know how many times people have asked and begged and pleaded for, and it's not like I've denied it, like me have denied for Meshery CTL to be separate from Meshery server. Why is Meshery CTL in its own repo and it's like, there's a great argument for doing that. And there's also like, to the extent that you've already borne the pain of having separate workflows, one for building that, one for building that, it's like, it becomes less compelling to move them out because it just becomes another thing to manage. Another reason that we've kept some of the, why are we shoving the docs into the same repo? Why isn't that a different repo? It's like, well, in part because, and there's a bunch of things that factor in. One of them, you might get a chuckle, is like, because when people start the project or when they contribute to the project, people generally look at one repo, not the other 34 repos. They look at like one and they say, how active is the project? How well liked is it? It's like, well, actually, yeah, the more that we're doing in one, the higher concentration that is. Random. There's a bunch of things to think about. It might be, and this is what I was saying, is like, I think that getting to a distribution that's a singular binary, to the extent that that scales and works for people, or just as an initial deployment style, might be really helpful. There is some interweaving. Yeah. It's like, it's this classic, like, how do you not tightly couple everything? How do you decouple stuff, but still be able to guarantee that that version works with this version? Yeah.
Well, I guess you have to think about what their priorities right now are, and this conversation seems like it would mostly affect those working on adapters, probably. To the end user, I don't know if it would have any impact at all. And so right now we're developing for the end user, correct? So we can put the convenience of developers on hold. I'll focus on delivering features, which is the the end goal, right? Maybe.
Yeah, one thing to, yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, one thing to think about as you think through this more is for the non-adapter components, for the broker, mesh sync, NATs, the CTL, and Meshery server, and the upcoming Meshery perf, would there be any negative ramification to them for having a combined, for basically dissolving the Meshery Adapter Library into MeshKit, like consolidating that into MeshKit? Would they be, in what way would they be negatively affected? And can we show examples of where having the two of them together would have caused a slowdown or a hindrance to the adapters? If we can't, I think between those two things, if we can't show either of those two things, then maybe there isn't a strong argument for MeshKit and the library to continue to be separate. Because I, for my part, I think that the lines have been pretty muddied between what's supposed to go where and when. And the general decision-making framework was like, hey, is this going to be a library, an adapter only piece of functionality? And if so, put it there. If not, if it could be reused by Meshery server or CTL or others, then put it here. And it becomes unclean after a while. Maybe these two should come together. There's merit to that. So go good. I know.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I will say that it was rather difficult to work with the adapter. I've been trying to figure out what's causing the Nginx deployment to fail. And it took about a week of digging through the code to finally figure out the root cause. And the fix was actually in MeshKit. And so having to dig through and trace the calls through Nginx adapter, adapter library, MeshKit, all of that. It was a very time-consuming process.
Yeah, and it's not right. I mean, to the extent that we are writing these for the end users, doesn't mean that we should neglect the developer experience. I do think that this is a good question, and it's like, I think had you asked this a year ago, it would have been like, probably the other maintainers that were here would probably stick to their guns and say, well, here's all the reasons why, and etc. But with this having been there for a year or however long, it's appropriate to reflect on the value. Like, are we getting the value out of these two things being separate, or are we just kind of getting the complication? This has merit. I think that, it has merit. I mean, we need to make it easy to contribute to. We need to make it easy to maintain. Like, it's not yes, you're right. Ultimately, end user facing things are like have an additional +1 next to them inherently, but ultimately, if you can't maintain it, or it takes too long, and it takes this long to turn around a bug, it's like, well, that's definitely end user impacting as well. So Jared, I think you should keep it alive. I think we should start to, note the
pros and cons.
Yeah.
What about adding a discuss thread?
Yeah.
For us discuss. Yeah, everyone can pitch in.
Totally.
I
Totally.
I can start that and share that out.
Nice. Okay, Piyush was saying he may not be able to present his topic today, but Piyush, just a quick check. How's your bandwidth holding up? So
I think he dropped off.
I see. Pranav, I think you're up next.
Yeah. So basically, my topic is about SMB text testing and how we can show the output of the result of the test which we do on our CNCF labs, and how that can be shown for the end users. So the first thing to be noted is that we have this repository which uses the CNCF labs to run this test, and it uses our GitHub actions. So right now the thing is that we are just doing the test, and we cannot show the output of each of the results because there is no API which can fetch the results. So my goal was to write a design spec which can enhance the current, which can extend the current usage of the remote provider so that it can provide a new API which can be used by the SMT website. This one. And I'm currently working with Aditya Subedi on this. This is the dashboard which we are working on. So currently the API needs to be like written down. And other than that, then we can like see the results based on what we select on the dashboard. So that was my topic about.
Nice. And Pranav, part of what you were saying is a request for comment on the spec?
Yeah.
And I might have missed it. Did you say that does this spec also call out the API contract, so to speak? Oh yeah, it does. Okay.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Over here.
Yeah, I also added some of the details about the website, and that would be also helpful if anyone commented, give some reviews on it.
Yeah. And also let us know like what would be the good user experience for this dashboard. Like currently it looks like this. Let us know how we can improve it further.
Yes.
Yeah.
I basically explained the like website in the design spec, like how we are going to like configurations and how the charts are being shown, and if any more like additions to any user experience that could be like added there, it would be really helpful.
Yeah, Joe Tallarico of Isovalent, or of the Cilium project, I know he's seen this, but I thought he had some recent questions. If you guys have a specific, I don't know, you might try to give him a specific question for feedback on the website, because he's got, because he focuses in this area. So he's got.
Yeah. Okay. I'll ask him.
Yeah.
Like I think asking in the performance channel would be good.
Other comments for Pranav and Aditya? Abhi, you're up next.
Yeah. Okay, so as we know, we have a extension like Meshery extension, and MeshMap is one of the Meshery extension. So we have some needs of custom components to be drawn from the Meshery UI itself, like extended from the Meshery UI, and should be used by the components in much in a bit refined or changed way based on the what we need to provide. So this is what it is. So it is about Meshery extension custom components, and here is the loading component and how it has been used within the RSF forms. So this is a point where how we can provide custom components, how we can inject custom components from Navigator, any Meshery extension to Meshery repo is what I have written the doc for, and I just need a help with getting this talk on this talks page. So yeah, and thanks Srinivas for uh, yeah, getting up to that issue and fixing that. I hope we will open up here soon. So that was the update about extension. So do I need to provide some more information about how actually this extension is derived and shared between those two? I think it's quite boring. So.
Riveting. I'm just, yeah, no, great. Yeah, for those that some may eventually become quite interested in the ability to extend Meshery or to the ability to like create plugins. And so the documentation that you're keeping as you go on Meshery docs is going to be, it's going to be really helpful when they do. Harshit?
Yes.
The Kubernetes context switcher. Is Harshit on?
No, yes, no.
No, okay. But Rudraj is URL support for pattern delete.
Yeah. Share my screen. Yeah, so quick demo I was going to show you. So this is about supporting deleting patterns with URL in MeshCTL. But MeshCTL already supports applying patterns with URLs, but there was no way to delete patterns with URLs. So it just works very similar to how the apply operation works. Yeah, so this is again about consistency of design. Another thing that I wanted to bring up was currently we don't have any way of deleting existing patterns with pattern name either in MeshCTL pattern lead. Whereas in pattern apply, we could just supply the name of the pattern, and if it's saved, then it will be applied. So I was thinking if we could also have a way to delete like that with the pattern name. What do you guys think?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm only jumping in just to help speed this along, but I was as a quick recap, you were saying, hey, while there's a difference between deleting a design file, a pattern file, and deleting and deprovisioning the thing that it provisioned. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, totally. We should totally support both of those. Like there's no
Yeah,
question.
And also the wording, the delete is kind of also slightly ambiguous. People might be confused the pattern file or the specification or the provisioning.
Oh yeah, totally. It's totally ambiguous. Yeah. This actually, if Jared ends up looking, or Jared or anyone else ends up assisting or collaborating with Jared on Meshery CTL, points of clarification of like, hey, what happens if I take a pattern and apply a pattern? It provisions your infrastructure. What happens if I delete a pattern? Does that mean that I'm deleting the pattern? Or like, actually that can be the delineation is if you apply, importing a pattern, deleting a pattern, meaning the file itself. Meshery CTL mesh, provisioning infrastructure, deleting infrastructure. Or like, yeah, Rudraj, you're right. It's not clear today.
Yeah.
And the verbs make a difference. If I say import a pattern, for sure, that the file itself is going to come inside. You're not quite sure it could go either way, maybe if it was going to actually apply and deploy the infrastructure. But if that's presented in context of another command called MesheryCTL mesh apply or run, then it becomes a lot more clear. That said, like giving a bunch of feedback to the user on the command line is also helpful, especially after deleting something, is to repeat back to them, oh, pattern design file, this file name deleted, versus like, oh, Nginx service mesh deprovisioned these 4 components and listing them out, like, you know, yeah, please, please suggest a way kind of drive that home.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point that we should be mentioning on delete what actually happened, I guess, but also the wording of delete versus something like I don't know, maybe unprovision or unapply, something like that.
Yeah, it's yes.
Tear down.
Yeah, kill. Yeah, yeah.
Tear down.
All right. So
if we apply, what's the opposite operation? Remove?
It's delete right now.
Delete.
there's another, deploy, undeploy. Those might. Deploy definitely does not mean import a file. Deploy means, yeah. And so that's a good verb. But yeah, actually like writing down the verbs and the verb choices and why it's one of those things like what Jared was talking about. We have to write this down to really clarify, because it makes a big difference. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't even know if deprovision is a word recognized by,
Like a standard.
Yeah, it's in the Wiktionary, which means it's probably
what about revert? Revert. So you apply something, it's a configuration. We're speaking about, different configurations. And then if we revert, we're kind of like undoing. Would it make more sense?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I often think about,
this course material.
It'd be better to follow standard Kubernetes language. So for instance, kubectl, they use delete. Kubectl apply, kubectl delete. As far as usability, we're assuming people are already familiar with Kubernetes and kubectl, and so using the same verbs, I think would be more intuitive.
Yeah, actually, this doesn't.
That makes. Yeah, go on, Lisa.
No, yeah, sorry. This design spec doesn't say it explicitly. The main Meshery CLI design spec does. It says something obvious and kind of somewhat silly, is like, you want it to be intuitive. Yes, of course, but it gets more specific, and it says exactly what Jared just says, which is we should recognize that many of the users of Meshery CTL are also concurrently and historically users of either Docker or kubectl. And so, yeah, leaning into, and as a matter of fact, like some of them may come back and say they'd like for Meshery CTL's capability to be a kubectl plugin. Like, so leaning into being Kubernetes native we're going to find is the least amount of friction and the most probably intuitive for the specific user of Meshery. So I was just going to reinforce Jared's point.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think we should just be a little bit more explicit about it on the help that it deprovisions. Let me check how it is right now.
There he is.
Yeah. Else we'll need a help for the help.
There's a side topic on this one. I did notice that with the COI, if an incorrect command is entered for several of the commands, it just links you to the documents, which is not something I like to have happen when I misuse a CLI. Usually it says it'll display the help for that command rather than redirecting me to go somewhere completely different and context switch. Sorry, just a side.
Yeah, there's a contributor who should be on the call, Alpha or Aditya A, who is actively working on Godocs for Meshery CTL, such that, I mean, on a very related note, he's putting forth some significant effort to change the way in which Meshery CTL docs are auto-documented. And Jared, he's got an open PR on it, actually. It may be of interest to you. And yeah, to your point, sometimes, yeah, it's like, it's nice when, sometimes it's to take Jared's comment even further. It's not only nice to get the help spit back to you to let you know, give you some examples and things, but sometimes it's, if the help is like a page, like a full, I don't know, 100 lines long, sometimes even that is annoying. It's like, ideally you want help shown to you, unless it's way too much. Like, and it actually it only takes a little bit of thought to let people know if they were using Meshery CTL system context, if that's right where they were, then there's some very specific, there's only a couple of things they're trying to achieve. So like, it can be pretty tight, and pretty helpful. There can be for my part, like sometimes it's not, if it's a short URL, like it might be nice to, if you're giving them the help and then at the bottom, you're sort of saying like, also for further reference or future, like here's the link, as long as it doesn't take up a lot of space. For suggestions, there's a style guide on Meshery CLI that could use some improvement. It does, I think it say exactly what I was trying to say before, but like kubectl, like Docker to okay, so we're just a little over. Subedi, do you want to hit this last one real quick?
Yeah, so like, can you open that PR? Like, I have linked it. Yeah, there were some bugs regarding the design configurator not able to create new design. And when we tried to update the design through the YAML dialog box in the table view, the designs were not getting updated. So I fixed that. And another thing I fixed was that the application name, when we try to edit anything in the application, the name was not being displayed like after we edit anything in the YAML dialog box. So that is also fixed.
Yeah, nice. Any comment for Subedi? Gaurav and Abhi, if you guys think that's ready to go, I suppose you'll merge. Okay, so some topics for next week. Today will be Meshery. The Docker extension for Meshery will be on stage at DockerCon a couple of times over. And so there's a number of you that have been working toward this. And so good news, Docker wants to show it to DockerCon attendees. So that's good. If you're interested in trying it out, a couple of you have been given, or a number of you have been given access. Just go fill in the form here. Drop it I'll put it into the meeting minutes as well. Does anybody have anything else for today? All righty.
Just a quick comment. So I'm working on the, this is Mario. So I'm still working on the Meshery UI contributing updates for Cypress and end-to-end tests considerations. I'll be adding the discourse thread just to get some more feedback on pain points of contributors that already contribute there, and also newcomers like I know a lot of things working with this from years of experience, but it's just I want to be clear and concise, and just have the right level of the docs should be brief, but they should also point contributors to the right resources, but also at least try to give some basics, right? So
for my part, I have a request. I don't think I've ever run, I think there are make commands to run Cypress tests, but for my part, I haven't run those. And so if you consider, as you write that up, if you consider, I'll read that, I'll go do that.
Okay, maybe suggest some of those commands in the. Yeah,
because for my part, when I'm working on the UI, I would probably run those commands to help verify before I PR.
Okay, it sounds good. What about so we have a README for contributing to the UI, and then we also have the docs website. So I don't know, where should the most of the information be? At what point should we say, okay, go there? What's the ultimate source through the docs, right? The website?
Yeah, probably the docs. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
It used to be Google Docs, but then we ended up publishing a lot of it onto the site, and so just for ease of reference by everybody. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, because if you're contributing, I suppose you would look at the README, but then at some point, usually you get redirected over to the website. Okay, makes sense. Anything else anyone would like to add? Yeah, I'll add the discourse thread just so anyone can provide any pain points, how they would like to see, what will they like to see in the contributing guide, just to get more feedback, better quality docs going on. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Mario. Yeah. And cross-browser compatibility, if that's a component of this, that might be nice. I don't know if those are,
Yeah, totally.
All right, anybody have anything else? Nice. Same time next week. All right, we'll see you all then. Yeah. Bye, guys. Bye.
That's all. Bye.